for joining us for ADAA's educational webinar, The Plight of the Fearful Flyer in 2025 and How to Overcome It. My name is Jolie Busby, and I'm the Education and Training Manager at ADAA. So a little housekeeping for today's event. This webinar is being recorded. Closed captioning and translation are available. Attendees will receive a link to the recording within 3 business days. This webinar is question and answer enabled for participants to ask questions through the Q&A feature. You can find it on the Zoom toolbar, usually right next to the chat or 1 or 2 icons over. And we'll do our very best to answer questions asked during the presentation, but we may not get to everyone. So now I'm very pleased to introduce our moderator for today's event, Stephanie Thomas. Stephanie is the owner of a solo practice in Westminster, Maryland, and also works part-time as an associate at the Anxiety and Stress Disorders Institute in Towson, Maryland. Her unique life experiences growing up in rural New Zealand, traveling and living in several countries around the world, as well as the master's degree obtained at a culturally diverse pastoral counseling program from Loyola College in Maryland, enabled her to bring a willingness to risk failure when she opened her solo practice. Welcome, Stephanie. Thank you so much for moderating today's webinar. I'm going to turn the presentation over to you now.
Okay, thanks, Jolie. And as always, it's always a pleasure to do this. It's my pleasure to introduce Dave Carbonell, who I've known for over 20 years now, Dave.
Long time.
And he's a clinical psychologist in Chicago, and he specializes in helping people overcome their fears around flying and fears around phobias and worry in general. He's the author of 4 self-help books: The Panic Attacks Workbook, The Worry Trick, Fear of Flying Workbook, and Outsmart Your Anxious Brain, 10 Simple Ways to Beat the Worry Trick. He's the coach of the popular self-help site, anxietycoach.com, and I recommend you all go there afterwards, and has taught workshops on the treatment of anxiety disorders to more than 10,000 therapists in the US and abroad. He received his doctorate in clinical psychology from DePaul University in 1985 and has maintained a practice devoted to the treatment of anxiety disorders in Chicago since 1990. He lives in Chicago with his wife and a pair of rescue dogs, and it's not on here, but Dave also does he's a bit of an actor, and so I think you're in for a treat here today, everybody. All right, Dave, I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you, Stephanie. Good to see you here today. Let me get my slides up. Okay. So I think we're good with that. Oops. So thanks for coming out, everyone. Let me just mention at the top, the program is being recorded, so you can take notes if you like, but you might consider just sitting back and watching and taking everything in as much as you can. You could always go back and look at the recording if you want to make some notes later. So 3 main points. Let's get right to it. Fear of flying, terribly common. Most people who are afraid of flying tend to think they're one of a small number. They feel ashamed, they feel embarrassed, but it's a big common problem, upwards of 25 million Americans significantly affected. And it's a treatable problem. People have a lot of trouble with this phobia. But that notwithstanding, that this is a very solvable and treatable problem, and if you approach it the right way, you can learn how to handle this and get back to traveling the way that you wanted to. And most importantly, probably the most important word I might mention today, this is a counterintuitive problem. Most problems we face in life are intuitive. We can go with our gut instinct and figure out a way to solve it. This is a counterintuitive problem. And so the biggest obstacle you're going to face in overcoming this is struggling against your fear, because that's what it's going to urge you to do. What's a counterintuitive problem? If you get a new dog, you adopt a puppy, bring it home, the dog gets off the leash, runs away from you down the street. How are you going to get that puppy back? You might run after it, but that puppy's got 4 legs and you got 2. That's not going to work so well. You could stand there scratching your head. That's not going to help. What's the best way to bring that puppy back? You run away from that puppy rather than chase after it. You run away from that puppy, and now we're playing catch the owner, and everything is going to work out okay. And across the board, fear of flying is a counterintuitive problem where it's much more typically going to be the case that the opposite of your gut instinct will turn out to be useful to you. And people have so much trouble because they continue trying to run after the puppy. They continue following their gut instinct. And unfortunately, that's what makes it worse. So achieving that understanding and incorporating that's a key element to solving this problem. We're going to do a poll this morning of the audience. Jolie, if you would release the poll, this would be a good time to do that.
The poll has been started. And answers are already coming in quickly. Thank you, everyone. I'll be watching in the background.
Am I able to advance my slides while that's up here?
Absolutely.
What do I do? Minimize it?
Well, no one else can, we still see your slides perfectly.
Okay, but I can't seem to move to the next one.
Okay. Can you minimize the poll?
I did. Here we go. Okay.
Okay, great.
Thanks. So, what is it people fear about flying? This is often a source of confusion. Most people who are afraid of flying tend to be afraid of having some kind of a panic reaction, a panic attack, a moment of claustrophobic fear, some fear of fear on board the airplane that they fear is going to produce some terrible result. It'll make them sick. It'll cause them to die somehow. It'll cause them to lose control of themselves and run amok in the airplane. It'll cause them great shame and embarrassment. If you ask most people who are not afraid of flying, fear of flying, what's that about? They tend to think it's all about crashing. But actually, the majority of fearful flyers are people who are more likely to be afraid of getting afraid on the airplane and what that will do to them. And a smaller group, as it indicates on the slide, focus in on the prospect of a crash. But that losing control of myself, that's actually the mainstream kind of fear with respect to fear of flying, and that often confuses people.
And Dave, I had a question that came in this week that asked, do you find that having co-occurring OCD impacts treatment for fear of flying?
Yes, co-occurring OCD absolutely could affect it, depending on what the OCD is about. But just taking the O part, the obsessive part, boy, that's a big add-on with fear of flying, because when people have the quality of obsessiveness in their thinking, it's hard to get past some of those thoughts. They repeat the thoughts, they argue with them, they double down on trying to research them, and so on. Pretty much everyone, I think, who has a strong fear of flying has a little bit of that obsessiveness to their thought. And if somebody with full bore OCD, so much more powerful that influence is going to be. Your thoughts are really sticky with fear of flying, and finding a way to relate to those thoughts differently, finding a way to work with them rather than against them, is going to be a key to the progress you can make. So how are we doing on the poll here? Is that
So we are, I think, pretty much finished. We had 138 people respond.
okay?
And so right now, the question, do you have a flight booked in the next 12 months? 49% said yes, 51% said no. Second question, if no, do you hope to take a flight in the next 12 months? 91% said yes, and only 9% said no.
Okay, that's great. Thanks for feeding that back to me. So, okay.
Oh, there we go.
So 91% May or may not, maybe half of you have a flight planned already. 91% wanting to fly sometime in the next year. So it's an important thing to notice. People are afraid of flying and they want to do it. That's a special class of problem. Nobody comes to me, for instance, with the fear, gosh, I'm terrified of what will happen if I jump into the lion's cage at the zoo, Dave. Can you help me get over my fear of jumping into the lion's cage? Nobody wants to do that. That wouldn't be advisable. People instinctively want to be able to fly. And why is that? They recognize that there's something exaggerated, something misleading, something unhelpful about the fears they experience. They don't quite know how to go about getting that obstacle out of their path, but 91% want to fly anyway because they recognize this is not a useful guide to me. My fear is not enriching my life. My fear is not making my life safer. In fact, it's causing me some trouble. And I would like to find a way to get around it, to get past it, to overcome it. People are getting tricked by their fears, and more broadly, this is how I would characterize the trick. People experience the discomfort of all kinds of anxiety symptoms, physical sensations, strong, scary emotions, terrifying kinds of thoughts. They experience the discomfort of those symptoms and they treat those symptoms like danger and they want to run away from them and fight them off. And that's how the phobia literally tricks you into responding in ways that make it worse rather than better. Now, well, where am I? Discomfort is a pretty mild word for what you're experiencing here, but I wanted another word that began with a D to highlight this distinction between what's discomfort and what's danger. And well, that was the best I could come up with. So what does it tell you about a fear when you want to do it anyway? That there's something misleading, there's something unhelpful about that fear that I don't want to be guided by it.
And Dave, we had a question here about someone who struggles with emetophobia and they're afraid to fly because they're afraid of getting sick on the plane and throwing up on the plane. Would you categorize that in the same as this is a discomfort versus danger as well?
I would. I would. And of course, uh, I already made my apologies about the word discomfort seeming a mild word, but yes. In fact, airplanes are perhaps the only commercial vehicle that I can think of that come with a stomach distress bag on board. Uh, it's a pain in the neck if you get sick on the plane. It's uncomfortable. It's going to seem disgusting to you. It's going to seem embarrassing to you. Nothing dangerous about that at all. It's a cleanup problem. It's a coping with problem. So yes, I think someone with a metaphobia, with a strong fear of vomiting, that's going to add considerably to the power of their fear of flying. Nothing dangerous about it whatsoever.
Okay, thank you.
So, in terms of safety of flying, generally I find people who are afraid of flying, they know the statistics. They know them better than me when they come to see me or they come to my office. And in general, people recognize, well, flying is one of the safest activities you can engage in. And that's what makes it such a bitter pill to struggle with this. They kind of know better and they recognize that they know better and they try hard to convince themselves it's okay, it's okay. But all that convincing that they try doesn't help. And people will say that. I know that, but it doesn't help. Uh, the harder I try, the worse I get, people will say. And these are all subtle recognitions of that counterintuitive business. The harder you try and drum it into your head, the more you argue with yourself about the facts of the matter, the more difficulty and discomfort you're going to have. Same thing with people who are more afraid of panic attacks or vomiting or some other experience on the plane. Uh, they've already had probably lots of experience with what panic has done and has not done to them in the past. But it's hard for them to trust that history, that experience. They want to feel so sure that nothing bad will ever happen. And the only way they know how to do that is they want to try and purge all those thoughts from their mind. They tell themselves, don't think about it. They try and control their thoughts. They try and control their emotions. In fact, we don't control any of those things. The only thing we control is what we do with our hands and our feet and our mouth. They're trying so hard to control the thoughts that pass through their mind, the emotions that course through their body, and they think they somehow have to get rid of all those feelings first. That's doing it the hard way. That's generally what makes things worse rather than better. What you resist in terms of this phobia, what you resist will persist. And that's a useful phrase to keep in mind. So, if you're afraid of flying and you're going to fly, well, then you have reason to expect, okay, this is going to be unpleasant for me. I'm going to have those scary thoughts. I'm going to have those uncomfortable emotions. I want to work with them rather than against them. I want to have some way of allowing myself to feel afraid and moving on. And it's okay to be afraid. The airline is going to scan your baggage. The airline is going to scan maybe your shoes. They're not going to peer into your soul and look and see, do you have the right emotions for flying today? It's a come as you are party. You can fly when you're happy. You can fly when you're angry. You can fly when you're sad. You can fly when you're afraid, as long as you're the passenger. We don't want the pilot to be feeling that way. It's okay for the passenger to feel afraid. And it's going to work better to work with it rather than against it. This is a come as you are party. Bring whatever emotions and thoughts that you already had with you.
I think that's a really good, really important point, Dave, because so many people have said to me, I don't want to fly because I get to the airport and I'm too scared to get on the plane. And I think what you're saying is get on the plane anyway.
Let your feet do the walking.
Yeah.
Let your feet bring your frightened self with you onto the airplane. Because again, it's okay for a passenger to be afraid. The crew, well, we think we better switch out the pilot if that's how the pilot's feeling that day. As a passenger, it's perfectly fine. Because what is the job of a passenger? Well, I like to think of it this way. The job of a passenger, your baggage that breathes. You come in, welcome to our plane, sit down. We'll let you know when you can have a soda. We'll let you know when you can get up and move around and when you can't. We'll do it. We'll control everything. You just sit back and we'll tell you when you arrive. It's a very small job, and all those emotions, all those thoughts don't particularly interfere with your ability to do the job. They interfere with how comfortable or uncomfortable you may feel. And so we're back to once again working with the discomfort of this rather than trying to protect ourselves against the danger.
Okay.
So how do people oppose the fear? They're going to respond with a variety of what psychologists like to call safety behaviors. And these are basically uh, big, long list of ways that people oppose the fear they have. And you see a whole bunch of them on the screen here. In particular, people will try and do a lot of distraction. They'll try and pretend to themselves that they're home in their living room. They'll close their eyes. They'll cover their ears. That they'll try and imagine they're somewhere else. They'll distract by trying to get involved in a book or a movie. So here's something to consider. What does it tell me about a problem if I'm motivated to distract myself from it? Or what kinds of problems might we want to distract ourselves from? And maybe if you think about it, it'll occur to you, well, if there was a big pit bull come running down the street at me, looking to rip me limb from limb, I wouldn't be distracting myself from the dog. I'd be focused like a laser on that dog, looking for a fence to climb, a stick to swing. What does it tell me if I'm motivated to distract myself from a problem? It tells me that the chips are not down right now. When the chips are down, I do what I have to do. When I'm motivated to distract, Oh, I'm having all this unpleasantry in here and in here. Out here, not so bad, but in here, that's what I'm trying to distract from. So that's a good reminder when you find yourself in that struggle to distract and get away from your thoughts. When do we do that? We do that when the chips are not down. Telling yourself, calm down. Well, maybe you've had the experience of other people telling you in certain circumstances, calm down, calm down. Does anybody ever calm down when they're told, "Hey, calm down, you"? I don't think so. And I don't think it works any better if I tell myself, calm down, damn it. It doesn't work any better if I command myself in that way than if somebody else does. And here we get back again to the counterintuitive piece. I'm afraid, I'm anxious right now. Wish I wasn't. Don't like it, don't want it, don't deserve it. But you know what? If I got to be afraid now, it's okay because I'm just a passenger. It's okay to feel afraid. So um, it'll be very, very useful. A big part of the work to do here is as part of an exposure program to take a good inventory of the safety behaviors that you may engage in. And you probably have to do this over time. There's probably lots of them. Some of them are subtle, some of them are obvious. Getting a good inventory of the safety behaviors that you customarily use is going to be a key part of the treatment because hopefully, as you do exposure work with this fear, you're going to come to let go progressively, a step at a time, more and more of those safety behaviors. A number of years ago, a man came to me about taking one of my groups that involved a practice flight, and he said basically, "Well, I don't see how that's going to help, Doc. I flew 100,000 miles last year. How many did you fly?" And I was more afraid the last mile than the first mile. So, okay, well, that's a problem. We talk about it a little more, and it turns out, yeah, he did fly 100,000 miles, but he flew with alcohol. He flew grabbing onto the armrest. He flew closing his eyes and trying to pretend he wasn't on the plane. He flew with all this stuff, and that invalidated any benefit he could have gotten from the flying. He got no relief, no benefit from that exposure because it wasn't really exposure. It was him flying afraid and trying desperately to fight off and protect against the fear. And when we do exposure with fear of flying, it's not exposure to the flying, it's not practice flying, it's exposure and practice with all those unpleasant thoughts and feelings and emotions that I experience on the airplane. That's the exposure. And so in his case, he had the frustrating experience of I flew all these miles, I got no benefit from it because I was relying on alcohol, because I was struggling to hold on to the armrest, because I was doing all kinds of anti-anxiety stuff that prevented me from benefiting from the exposure. So that's a key piece that people often aren't told, that you need to let go of those protections in order to get the benefit of the exposure.
Dave, I'm seeing a lot of questions about the plane, fear of the plane crashing,
Hmm.
and people know, even though people know the statistics, they feel like their flight is the flight that's going to be the one that crashes.
Yes, yes. Um, Yeah, well, and I understand that if I'm getting on a flight, well, that's the most important flight of the day. I think we all have that idea. It's interesting if you ask someone who got as far as the airport and decided, no, it's not safe. I'm not getting on. They turned around and go home. I usually like to ask them, did you check the news later that day to see if that plane crashed or not? Well, no, it passed right out of my mind. It wasn't going to crash if I wasn't on it. Sometimes people will leave the plane and leave family members on the plane that the family members or friends are going to continue with the trip. And I'll ask them, did you have any concern that those folks were going to die in a crash? No, no, it's an idiosyncratic thing. If I'm on the plane, that's the one that's going down. I've never run a practice group, a practice flight, where somebody in the group didn't say, usually just as we were boarding, gosh, wouldn't it be ironic if all the headlines today were fear of flying group, dies in plane crash. Every single time that thought comes up, it's part of the program. Yeah, you're going to have that thought. And what does that thought mean? That thought means I'm real afraid right now. That thought tells me nothing about what's going to happen in 5 minutes or 5 hours or 5 days. It's not about future events. It's about the fact that I'm afraid now. And good, I needed that reminder. What am I do? What did I come on this plane for in the first place? I came because I need to practice feeling afraid and working with it. So yes, you'll have those thoughts. That's a symptom of the fear of flying. That's not a story from next week's newspaper or a message from God. That's just you feeling afraid right now.
Mhm. And another question is about what do we do if I'm afraid of turbulence? What am I supposed to do when the plane is bumping up and down?
Well, I think the best advice is be in your seat, stay in your seat with your seatbelt on, uh, because the concern about turbulence isn't for what it's going to do to the airplane. It's about, gosh, what if somebody is up and about when there's turbulence? They might get hurt. If they're not in their seat, they're vulnerable. Um, but here again, we have, you're probably going to experience this thought, oh my gosh, what if turbulence brings the plane down? This doesn't feel safe. I'm picturing terrible things happening to the wing or the body of the aircraft. The fact is, the history is, the turbulence has never brought a plane down. That planes are designed for turbulence. I have a little picture that I used to show in my flying groups where they're testing. I think this was a 737. They're testing it to see how strong it is, and they've got a winch around the wing, and they've bent that wing until it breaks off, and they've bent it to 90 degrees up. Okay, you're not going to have turbulence that bends a wing 90 degrees. So yes, turbulence is unpleasant. Those of you that dislike scary rides aren't going to like turbulence. It's going to toss you around and make you feel uncomfortable, maybe interfere with your distraction. Is it a threat to the airplane? No. Does knowing that relieve the fear? No, no, that's again one of the discomforts that you're going to have to practice with. That's part of the price you pay for being able to go from New York to Los Angeles in what, 5 hours, rather than 5 days of driving. I might have to put up with that discomfort. So certainly that can happen. That often will happen. Pilots like to steer around turbulence not because they have any concern of what it's going to do to the plane, but because they know it's uncomfortable for the passengers. And if they can steer around it, they will. And if they can't, they won't.
I've got another question here about the fear of crashing feels a lot more real, especially now that, just recently there's been a lot of reports about crashes. Can you speak to flight safety a little?
Well, the fear is real. The danger basically is not. There's lots of reports about crashes because, well, there's lots and lots of reports about the same crash. Pick the one out in outside of DC earlier this year in the US, or last week the one in India. Um, it's astonishing how few crashes there are. If we wanted to trot out the statistics, which I typically don't do, the odds are something like 1 in 800 million. It's astonishing how safe flying is, and yet because of this, because the crashes like that are so rare, we see them, we hear about them, we read about them, we think about them. It's a big deal, far out of proportion to all the other terrible things that happen to people in their regular lives. So yes.
Even with all the FAA problems, air traffic control staffing problems, you'd still say that flying is safer than any other mode of transportation.
Yes, yeah, I would. Certainly, we have a challenging environment for working with thoughts right now. We have all the thoughts about government cutbacks and firing people and letting go and all of this stuff. And that's a bad backdrop. I don't see any evidence whatsoever that that's been associated with planes falling out of the sky. We got a problem there, a government problem that needs to be addressed. I don't see any evidence that that's materially changed the relative safety of flying.
Mhm.
It has changed perhaps the amount of time and attention we give to the thought and make those thoughts more sticky, make those thoughts more obsessive, give people more anxiety. I think it's increased the discomfort. I don't see any evidence that it's changed the parameters of the danger.
Okay. Here's a really good question. How do I distinguish effective coping mechanisms? For example, looking out the window at the horizon to remind myself the plane isn't moving so much during turbulence versus safety behaviors. I'm not, and this person is not clear what the difference between coping mechanisms are and what bad safety behaviors are.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I suspect most people probably won't get rid of every single last one of their safety behaviors. Hopefully, what they do is they begin to remove and move away from the most troublesome ones. And the most troublesome ones uh, involve overt avoidance. Does it lead me to not get on the flight? Does it lead me to walk off the plane once I've been there? Um, does it lead me to tighten and tense up my body when I'm hoping to protect myself, but that actually tightens up all my muscles and makes me more anxious? So what's the actual effect of the safety behavior on my immediate sensation? I suspect that looking out the window, getting whatever mild reassurance a person can get from that, reestablishing their line of sight, probably very little downside to that. I wouldn't be concerned about that one. I would look for the safety behaviors that increase rather than decrease my immediate discomfort.
So, what might that look like? Let's say somebody's on a plane. What would be a good coping skill to use when they're feeling afraid?
Uh, oh, they could look around the aircraft and get a little attention to what's going on with everyone else here. Because I have my own internal experience with my alarm bell ringing, danger, 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 get the heck out of here. How's everybody else doing today? Well, this one's playing Sudoku, and that one's asleep, and this one looks nervous. There's quite a range of emotions in the 150 or 200 people around me. It's useful to see that. This is a slice of life. They're not all going through the same internal experience I am. I've brought to bear something different than they have, and so I'm having a different reaction. It's good to see there are multiple reactions going on. I think that would be a way to go.
Mhm.
If you find that you're repeatedly engaging in a safety behavior and it doesn't seem to be working for you, if you keep rereading the first 2 pages of the novel that you brought, if you keep having to go back to the beginning of the movie that you're trying to watch, well, you're trying too hard to distract yourself. Maybe let that go for a little bit. So look at the way your safety behaviors are affecting you in the moment. If you feel better, well, okay, maybe that's one of the more benign ones. If it's tightening up your body, if it's getting you more obsessively focused, probably try and find something a little different. Look in the opposite direction.
Mhm. Okay. I have a question from Stephanie Woodrow. Is fear of flying a specific phobia, or could it be other diagnoses like panic disorder, OCD, and agoraphobia?
Yeah, it could be any of those. Fear of flying is a peculiar one. Um, it really describes a fear that, in terms of where it happens. It happens on the plane. What are people afraid of? We might have 40 people afraid of flying on the same flight, and maybe 25 of them are having a different fear. One is afraid of vomiting, and one is afraid of a heart attack, and one is afraid of crying and making a spectacle of himself. One is afraid of crashing and dying. There's a whole bunch of fears. So all we really know is this fear has taken place on board the airplane. And with each and every one of them, if I'm working with them individually, we want to know what are you afraid will happen, and how can we evaluate that fear? But that's an excellent question. There's all kinds of different diagnostic labels, if you will, that might might take place there. What's important is that the person is getting afraid and probably resisting and protecting against that fear, trying to fight off the fear in ways that make them more upset rather than less. Losing sight of the fact that it's okay to be afraid and that that's how we want to approach it.
I know I've had this with a lot of my clients. What do you do? Do you have any tips for the anticipatory anxiety? I'll have clients who say they're afraid of a flight 6 months beforehand.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. This is probably the most difficult part, the anticipation, because it's in response to the anticipatory anxiety, days, weeks, months ahead of time, that people so often decide I'm not going to go. And so it's important to specifically target the anticipation. Um, and so we want to work with the anticipation rather than against. And here's where some traditional methods, people may have tried them and found, gee, I don't get so much relief when I try and do cognitive restructuring with my fear of what will happen on the airplane. Because they're trying too hard to be sure. They're having that obsessive piece come in. I need to prove to myself beyond a shadow of a doubt that nothing bad will happen. I won't have a panic attack. I won't make a fool of myself. I won't die in a plane crash. I want to prove the absence of something bad in the future. Yeah, when we need to be sure, we can't have that. And so I think the key point with anticipation is we want to change the way we relate to the thoughts rather than trying to change the content of the thoughts. So how do we change the way we relate to the thoughts? Well, most people try and oppose and distract and get away from their thoughts. I'm going to suggest, let's have you schedule some time to do your worrying. And maybe when it gets to be 10 days, 2 weeks ahead of time before the flight, maybe you have a worry appointment once or twice a day. You set aside 10 minutes and you work with the thoughts in a particular way. I like to have clients uh, do their worrying out loud, do it in front of a mirror, do it repeatedly for 10 minutes, no problem solving, no reassuring, just over and over repetition, but done in a way that they can hear it and see it. It's not back of the mind. It's not subliminal the way so much worrying is. Now we're making it very overt. And what I find is as people work with the worry in that manner, it begins to lose some of its power to disturb them. It becomes, if you can believe this, a little boring to be repeating those thoughts out loud into a mirror for 10 minutes. I may ask people to do things that seem even sillier. Can you do your worrying in a foreign language, a language that you're not so good in? How do we say crash in German? Already we're having a different relationship with the thoughts just by virtue of trying to translate them into another language. Can you make poems? Can you make songs out of your worries? We want to take the content, the really unpleasant content, and find a way to play with it rather than try and hold it at arm's length.
Mhm.
The intuitive instinct is to get that out of here, and that just makes those thoughts more persistent. So let's play with the thoughts in some fashion. That's usually the direction I like to go with distraction.
Okay. So Jenny Matthews, who runs a Fear of Flying program, and Jenny, I apologize, I don't remember what state you're in, says many Fear of Flying programs teach a lot about mechanics of flying and help people to trust the industry and the mode of transportation. Do you find this helpful or just more of doing it the hard way?
Um, I don't particularly find it helpful. I tend not to do that. If you look at my fear of flying workbook, I might have a paragraph in the entire book about safety, and I think it says something like, "Well, here's the part where we talk about safety. Yeah, 1 in 800,000. Fly every day for 20,000 years before you can die." Stuff like that. The evidence is overwhelming. It's just not persuasive because people have that obsessive quality to their thoughts where I have to get this thought out of my head. I'd rather help them come to see, no, you don't need to get this thought out of your head. Well, if you have to fly with that thought, so be it. The more you can allow it, the more you can turn yourself over to it, the more you can fly while practicing with those symptoms, because that's what those thoughts are. They're symptoms. the more you can do that, the weaker and the less troublesome they will get over time. But you don't want to argue with them because you're essentially arguing with yourself. And a person arguing with self, this is such an evenly matched contest, it can go on forever. Always arguing with myself. So yeah, okay, I'm having the thought once again of death and destruction. Oh well, do I want an orange juice or a Coke?
Okay. Okay. And Jenny is from Minnesota, by the way. Um,
Mm, thanks, Jenny.
Another client is saying, my biggest fear of flying is getting hypoxia, which I think is one of those the mechanics of flying questions that there's a worry about what could happen, a lack of oxygen in a aircraft. Um, would you call that under the same thing that it's a worry about what could happen rather than a worry based on mechanics of flying?
Um, well, I might ask the client, if somebody came to me with that, I'd probably want to find out, well, what's been your experience with hypoxia on airplanes? Uh, has this been a problem for you in the past? Have you encountered this in the past? I want to help people look at, let me see if this is the next slide. Yeah, be guided by your history, not your what if thoughts. And so, whether a person is afraid of hypoxia or they're afraid of losing control themselves and running up and down the airplane like a crazy person and getting duct taped to the chair, whatever their fear is, I'm going to want to find out what's been your experience with this? What's the most out of control thing you ever did on an airplane? If I were sitting across the aisle from you, what would I notice you doing? It's like that old Sergeant Friday TV show. I'm really showing my age here. Just the facts, ma'am. What has happened? Hypoxia. Yeah, I personally am very opposed to being without oxygen. I really want to have oxygen all the time. That seems important to me. Um, what do I do if the thought about hypoxia pops up in my mind? Well, I'd rather have the thought about hypoxia than no oxygen. Okay, I'm having an unpleasant thought now. That thought is a measure of how I'm feeling right now. It's not any prediction, any valid indicator of what's going to happen to the oxygen in 30 minutes or 3 hours or 2 days. So, one person's hypoxia is another person's vomiting or another person's heart attack or whatever. It's a what if, fill in the blank. And the important part of that worry statement is the what if part. Because what does that what if really mean? Here's what I think it means. Here's something terrible that isn't happening now. And why don't you think about it? Why don't you pretend that it is? It's an invitation to worry. Uh, when I uh, show you some of the things I encourage people to do on the flight, I'm going to ask them to keep track of their worrisome thoughts, to have an inventory of the scary thoughts, the unpleasant emotions, keep track of how many times during the flight they have that. They're literally going to be keeping a simple frequency count. Oh, here's the hypoxia thought again, and here's the gripping the armrest again. I want to help people become a better observer of the ways that they experience fear, the scary thoughts, the physical behaviors, the sensations. It's useful to be able to observe those and notice, okay, there it goes again, feeling anxious. All right, check, check, check. That counting that I'm going to ask people to do with the observer forms, that's a proxy for acceptance. That's helping me move more in the direction of what Claire Weeks used to call floating. Let me just be with these uncomfortable sensations. Let me just be with these unpleasant thoughts. Don't like them, don't want them, don't deserve them, no good need for them. But oh well, if this is the present circumstance, I could fly with a headache, I could fly with a stomach ache, and I can fly with these, particularly since I'm a passenger.
And you'd say the same about claustrophobia, right? That would go just be another one of those thoughts as well.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, yeah.
yeah.
With claustrophobia, we might talk about, well, how does the size of the airplane compare to the size of your dinette? But yeah, it's essentially the same thing. It's a set of uncomfortable circumstances, sensations, I'd rather not have them. If I could find a better way to go cross country that didn't expose me to those feelings, well, that would be okay. But driving 5 days across the country, that doesn't seem like an acceptable substitute. So how can I work with those sensations? This is, if you want to think about it this way, it's kind of an emotional surcharge that some people have to pay on top of their airfare. So it's going to cost you $400 and also 30 minutes of agonizing worry. Are you willing to pay the price? Um, Wish it wasn't. Wish it wasn't there. It'd be nice if I didn't have to do that. But okay, if I got to think about those things, I can have ways of thinking about them that don't agitate and build up my fear more. I can play with them rather than dread them.
Okay.
So yeah, so absolutely. What's been your history? People have all kinds of terrible fears. What if I do this? What if I do that? What if this happens? What's been your history? And typically, what we find is that people haven't done any of those things. Everybody's seen those terrible stories about somebody that, has too much to drink, has some kind of a drug reaction, and they act like a crazy person on the airplane. And they get duct taped to the chair and carried off at the next stop. And every time I see one of those, I know what's happening across the country. Every person with panic attacks, everybody with fear of flying is looking at that thinking, oh my God, that could be me. Well, no, it couldn't really be you because people with panic attacks tend to be inordinately cooperative. Try so hard to stay out of the way and not cause trouble. The person that acts in this manner, they had a lot of different kinds of problems than the person with panic or claustrophobia. But once again, there's a stimulus for having those thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to play with those thoughts rather than use them as the basis for me to cancel my reservation.
And we had one person ask, if I've been somebody who stood up before and asked the pilot to take the plane back to the gate, what do I do differently now? How do I deal with that?
Um, well, I guess first thing I would want to know, a little more. Um, did somebody say to you, I'm sorry, we can't do that, and then you sat down and went on? Or Uh, did it seem to you as though you charged the cockpit and they had to pin you to the ground? If you made a request and they said no, and then you went on with the flight, okay, I'd want to know how do you feel about that? Have you come away with some kind of embarrassment? Or are you concerned that everybody on the plane went home that night and that was what they talked about over the family dinner table, what you said on the aircraft? What's been your reaction to that? But as you describe it, yeah, okay, that was somebody that felt afraid and they asked for some relief and then they didn't get it and they had to put up with that. Um, I think it's realistic to expect what once the plane pulls away and the trip starts, you're going and you're going to have anxiety and you have to work with that. Um, I'd want to talk with that person. Well, what happened when, how was the rest of your day? How did the flight go? How did you do the next day? Um, uh, what did it do versus what did it threaten to do? How has that influenced you? But always coming back to what's been your actual history? What's the most out of control thing that you did? What was the worst thing that was done to you? Um, People so often don't distinguish between the picture they had in their head of what might happen and what actually happened.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think this person was afraid of getting arrested if they get up and say, I can't do this flight.
Yeah, well, I think, there is a reasonable concern depending on how disruptive a person was. It might come to that somebody might get arrested. My experience is the people I work with panic and claustrophobia and all these others. Um, uh, well, here's an example. When we do a group flight, I'll sometimes go to the person in the group who seems to be the most concerned about control, And I'll say, you want to do an experiment? And I'm always asking clients, would you be willing to do an experiment? Okay, yeah, Dave, I'll do an experiment. Well, here's an experiment. I'd like you to push the call button and ask the flight attendant for a packet of sugar. No, I don't want to do that, Dave. That's stupid. That's well, come on, it's just an experiment. I've asked you to do many experiments. Push the five button. Ask the. No, I don't want to do that, Dave. I'm not having any coffee. It's stupid. Well, come on. After a while, it becomes apparent the person's not going to do this. Okay, if I finally asked them for an experiment, that they're digging in their heels and saying no. And so now I want to have a conversation with that person. If you're so unwilling to do this silly thing of pushing the call button to ask for some sugar that you don't need, how much less likely are you to be charging the cockpit and disrupting the entire flight? Okay, that's the point that I want them to recognize. They have all these fears about, oh, wouldn't it be awful if I was out of control and did these terrible things? I guess it would be. But the what if isn't telling us anything about what you tend to do.
Yeah. I always say to clients, quit the what ifing and let's stay in the here and now.
Yeah, yeah. When this was a big thing, maybe 5 or 10 years ago, everybody had to have an elevator speech to introduce yourself to someone, tell them what you did professionally. Th This was mine. Uh, I'm Dave Carbonell. I'm a psychologist. I work with people who are afraid of things that tend not to happen. That's what my practice is about.
Hmm. Did you have more slides? Because we have a ton of questions.
Yeah, let's just lay them on me. I'll just continue to go through the slides and take questions. I wanted to just emphasize this point again. You're a passenger. Be a passenger. Fulfill all the role of a passenger. A passenger doesn't need to check the Weather Channel. The airline has somebody doing that for you. Passenger doesn't need to check the flight plan. The passenger doesn't need to investigate the background of the pilot. Doesn't need to do anything really. Show me where to sit and I'll sit. Be a passenger as much as possible. The more you get away from the role of passenger, the more likely you are to be getting into trying to control stuff that you can't. And that's anxiety provoking.
Hmm. So you're really coming at this from an attitude of, come on, anxiety, bring it on. I can be, like Reed Wilson says, I can be here and do this no matter how I feel.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, uh, when we talk about a practice flight, um, practice is actually with being afraid on the airplane. The practice isn't with flying. We know flying works. The crew knows flying works. The practice is with the fear. And so I want to show up and allow myself to have fear to work with, to practice so that over time I become less and less afraid of getting afraid. So that's absolutely right. And the only way to do that, the most effective way, is to show up and practice with the fear. And conversely, the least effective way is to strive in all kinds of ways to reduce the amount of fear I'm going to have on the airplane, because then I feel protected. And you know what? The more I feel protected, the more I come to believe I have a need to be protected. And you don't. You just need a seat.
And I have two anonymous attendees here who've one said, "Hey, I actually witnessed a couple of crashes where people died," and another one said um, that they were on a flight that had a system malfunction where the air mask dropped and the plane lost cabin pressure. And now they're, is there anything you'd suggest to work on specifically to get back on a plane again?
Well, now we're probably talking about people who experience something closer to what we would call post-traumatic stress disorder, where they went through an actual bad experience, life-threatening or apparently life-threatening. And yeah, that's a tougher nut to crack. They have a little more work to do. They probably need to find some way to revisit and reprocess the story and the sensations they had about that. Um, so the only additional piece is they're probably going to have to be revisiting and reviewing that story for a while to get some of the effects out of their system.
Yeah. Okay.
There's some extra work there beyond uh, the more conventional panic disorder where it's all what if of stuff that I haven't actually experienced.
Mhm.
Dr. Carbonell and Stephanie, we have about maybe 2 minutes more for a couple of questions or a little more information from your slides.
Okay, I think, let's see. Yeah, okay. I'll just mention some of these tools, the symptom inventory. I ask people to keep track of what their symptoms they're having on the flight. I ask people to graph their fear at 10-minute intervals. The panic journal to it's a questionnaire when they're literally having a panic attack on the plane. Ways to get into the role of observer. The more you can be in the role of observer, the less you're going to feel cast in the role of victim. So that's a useful thing to do. Most of those you'll find on my website and also in my Fear of Flying workbook. Um, Description of the aware steps. I'm not going to try and do that now, but that's also something that you can read about on the website and in the workbook. Um, so yeah, we can take whatever time we have left for another question or two. I want to thank everybody for showing up and asking your questions and paying attention.
Stephanie, did you have one or two more questions?
Yes, we do. Sorry, my screen just froze a little. Somebody asked about virtual reality. Is that helpful for some people?
It seems to be helpful for some people. There's research that indicates that. I think probably, people that find that useful, they still have an extra step because, well, I'm still aware, okay, now I'm going to transition from the VR machine to a flight, but maybe it breaks it into smaller steps. And if it breaks it into smaller, more digestible bits, well, that's always to the good.
Mm. And if someone actually has a panic attack on a plane, what would you tell them to do?
Uh, okay, I'm having a panic attack. Don't like it, don't want it, don't deserve it. But I'm not going to ignore it. I'm not going to pretend it's not happening. I'm going to allow myself to panic and work through it rather than try and repel it somehow.
Yeah. Do we have time for one more, Jolie, or are we done?
Yes, squeeze. We have so many. Squeeze one more in.
Okay. Um, what do you recommend to decrease the sympathetic response system? I think you just answered that.
Yeah, um, it's nice to know how to do a little belly breathing. I think that's a good thing. Most people, when they think of doing a breathing exercise, show me your deep breath. They try and suck it in like that. And then I'm going to ask them, well, what would be the opposite of that? Because that's really where we need to go. And eventually they're going to see, well, the opposite of is needs to start with a sigh. A sigh. That's the first step in being able to breathe more from my diaphragm in a more calming manner. So, I have a nice video and descriptive article on the website about how to do that breathing exercise. But it fits in. It comes down to counterintuitive again. My gut instinct is, and actually, what's going to be more useful is, oh, this again.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Well, and thank you. We are at time. Many, many thanks to you, Dr. Carbonell, for presenting to us. This topic clearly resonated with many, many people that signed up to attend and all of the great questions that came in. Gratitude to you, Stephanie, for moderating. Excellent job. It was very helpful to have you on board with us today. And so I'll just wrap us up and share just a little bit about ADAA, that the Anxiety and Depression Association of America works to prevent, treat, and cure anxiety disorders and depression through the alignment of science, treatment, and education. We invite you to explore our website at adaa.org, where you can find resources such as the Find Your Therapist directory, evidence-based webinars, blogs, and videos like today's event, our free online peer-to-peer communities, self-help books and publications like our Patient Guide to Mood and Anxiety Disorders. And finally, we ask that you consider subscribing to our free monthly e-newsletter, Triumph. Thank you to everyone that joined us today.